In the thick of preparing for the Winter Olympics, Beijing is suffering from a scandal exposed by a top Chinese athlete. The United Nations is concerned about her whereabouts, and an International Tennis Association is considering cutting business ties with China. NBA player Enes Kanter is speaking out, pointing the spotlight on the widespread killing of Chinese prisoners of conscience for their organs. U.S. President Biden considers a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics, meaning U.S. government officials wouldn't attend, though American athletes would still compete. Beijing rolls out new technology for use in its Xinjiang region. It's a kind of a motion sensor reportedly used to detect potential terrorists. And a top university in Europe is found to be leaking technology to China's military, all because of one staff member there. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. With 2.5 months till the Beijing Winter Olympics, a Chinese athlete is gaining more attention internationally. The United Nations is backing her, and the Women's Tennis Association is considering pulling out of China because of her. Some say Beijing is suffering of its own making.
The UN Office for Human Rights requested information over the whereabouts of Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai on Friday. UN Human Rights spokesperson Liz Thorsell.
We would stress that it's important to know that she, where she is and her state, know about her well-being. And as I said, we think it would be important that there's an investigation into her allegations of sexual assault.
Former doubles world #1 Peng has not been seen or heard from publicly since she said on Chinese social media on November 2nd that former Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli coerced her into sex, and they later had an on-off consensual relationship. Neither Zhang or the Chinese government have commented on her allegation. Peng's social media post was quickly deleted, and the topic has been blocked from discussion on China's heavily censored internet. Concerns among the global tennis community and beyond has grown over Peng's safety. The Women's Tennis Association, or WTA, is calling for an investigation and said it was prepared to pull its tournaments worth tens of millions of dollars out of China over the issue. On Wednesday, WTA Chief Executive Steve Simon said he had received an email purporting to be from Peng and denying the allegations of sexual assault, but he cast doubt over the veracity of the email. A Chinese state media outlet also released the letter on Twitter. Hu Xijing, an influential Chinese state media editor, weighed in on the scandal on Twitter earlier on Friday, saying he does not believe Peng has been the target of retribution. Some of the world's top tennis players, including Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams, have tweeted #WhereIsPengShuai. The hashtag has racked up over 32 million mentions on Facebook's Instagram and Twitter, according to website Brand Mentions. Both platforms are blocked in China.
And although Peng hasn't been seen in public for more than 2 weeks, on Friday her photos were posted on Twitter, not by her, but by a CGTN editor. CGTN is one of the Chinese Communist Party's major media mouthpieces. The editor said Peng Shuai's WeChat Moments just posted 3 latest photos and said, "Happy weekend." This is supposed to show the world that Peng is doing just fine. Some netizens questioned if she really is fine, why doesn't the Chinese regime allow her to speak directly to the Women's Tennis Association? And in the U.S., an NBA player is speaking out again. Boston Celtics star Enes Kanter slammed Beijing for its human rights records, this time for the widespread killing of prisoners of conscience for their organs. The athlete wrote on Twitter, "Stop murdering for organs. It's a crime against humanity." He mentioned Tibetans, Uyghurs, Christians, and Falun Gong practitioners. Kanter's posts include photos of a new pair of customized sneakers with the same message. On one side of his shoe reads a slogan in bold letters saying, "Stop organ harvesting in China." Kanter has already called out the Chinese regime's treatment of Tibetans and Uyghurs a couple of times in recent weeks, calling the CCP head Xi Jinping a brutal dictator. He also wore sneakers at games emblazoned with messages like freedom and no Beijing 2022 in opposition to the upcoming Olympics there. In China, organ donations are often connected to big money, and recently one province even published a price list for organs. 6 provincial government departments in central China's Henan province co-announced a list of payments provided for organ donations. These agencies include not only the Provincial Health Committee, but also the Department of Finance and the Administration of Market Supervision. The list says patients pay a so-called donated organ acquisition fee. That's more than $40,000 for an adult liver, more than $15,000 for a child's liver, more than $25,000 for a single kidney, and nearly $36,000 for both kidneys. Experts say such a list may encourage severe social pathology, such as kidnapping and murdering for organs. 3 Virginia residents fled persecution in communist China. Their stories help to shed light on the brutal persecution against the spiritual discipline Falun Dafa. So much so that many counties and cities throughout the state of Virginia passed legislation condemning the CCP's forced organ harvesting against Falun Dafa practitioners. Here's a look at the story.
Virginia resident Xinjiang Wang nearly died in a Chinese prison. Her 2 sisters were sent to labor camps. Her daughter forced to flee China. The family persecuted simply because they do the Falun Dafa spiritual practice.
My husband died from the persecution. I'm family broken. The business lost.
Xinjiang's health deteriorated during a 5-year prison sentence. Once she'd been tortured so badly that she lost consciousness 3 times in a row. Many Chinese victims, like Xinjiang, claim that the Chinese government is killing prisoners of conscience to sell their organs. This year, 23 Virginia localities passed resolutions warning residents about the risks of travel to China for an organ transplant.
Resolution condemning organ harvesting from people of conscience in the People's Republic of China.
According to human rights advocate David Kilgore, these transplants are often carried out secretly in what he describes as a mafia of medicine.
One man I heard about recently was being practically taken into the operating room after paying, I forget how much it was a lot of money he paid for his organ, and somebody said to him, "We need another $10,000.
In 2020, Virginia delegate David Bulova sent a sign-on letter to the Secretary of State urging action to help bring these atrocities to an end.
I think it's a terrible tragedy, and it's something that really gets to the core of humanity.
Bulova would like to see more efforts at the federal level.
You don't want to ever make it look like you're backing off or that you are letting this become normal, because it's not.
Xinjiang's sister, Chunying, talks about being held down by 9 guards to take her blood. A trained nurse herself, she suspected they were testing for organ compatibility. The family is now reunited in Fairfax County, but 19 of Xinjiang's friends and family members all died.
Will the U.S. boycott the Beijing Winter Olympics or not? President Biden said Thursday he is considering a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics, meaning he and other government officials would not attend. A move that Congress members from both parties support. And Senator Tom Cotton says U.S. athletes should boycott the games too. NTD's Melina Weiskup reports.
As we get closer to the Winter Olympics in Beijing, members of Congress are joining the call for a U.S. boycott. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has supported a diplomatic boycott, saying silence on this issue is unacceptable. It enables China's abuses. Although Biden has not officially announced his plans, Senator Cotton tells us he expects the administration will follow through because it's the only decision that's morally just.
If they allow the Secretary of State or the Vice President or someone else to lead a delegation to China, I think it would be an appalling lack of judgment and failure of moral leadership.
Cotton lists a number of crimes against humanity committed by the Chinese Communist Party, such as persecuting religious and ethnic minorities, using them for slave labor, and subjecting ethnic minority women to rape for ethnic cleansing.
They harvest organs from dissidents and ethnic and religious minorities.
Really crucial issue, particularly with Falun Gong practitioners in China. I know there's been some resolution here in Congress to help this issue, to condemn the issue. Why do you think that it hasn't moved forward, and what can the U.S. do to help this move forward?
Well, unfortunately, you have a lot of panda huggers in Congress who don't want to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party and who are carrying water for the Biden administration, who care more about things like getting Xi Jinping to make some fantastical promise about carbon emissions 30 years in the future, prioritizing these areas of what they perceive as needed cooperation with the Chinese communists, as opposed to standing up to a nation committing genocide against its own people.
Cotton is calling for even stronger action against the regime. He says a diplomatic boycott is the bare minimum and that a full boycott is needed, meaning even U.S. athletes shouldn't attend. The European Parliament has already passed a resolution for a diplomatic boycott. Many say the free world shouldn't have approved Beijing to host the Olympics in the first place. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Beijing has achieved an unprecedented degree of control, especially in the Xinjiang region, over an ethnic group called Uyghurs. From cell phone numbers to DNA, the authorities have weaponized technology against the people.
The spread of Communist China's censorship and surveillance methods is sounding the alarm. The U.S. Congress held a hearing Wednesday to address the issue. In his opening remarks, Chairperson Senator Jeff Merkley described how China's communist regime uses technology in nefarious ways.
These technologies offer the government an unprecedented degree of control, enabled by the collection of massive amounts of data from cell phones, from personal computers, DNA, security cameras, and more.
The participants agreed George Orwell's 1984 is no longer science fiction, but today's China. They spoke about the many faces of Communist China's techno-authoritarianism.
The Great Firewall now prevents China's citizens from global engagement through one of the most extensive internet censorship systems the world has ever seen.
China's northwest province of Xinjiang is home to 12 million people of an ethnic minority. Most are Uyghurs. Tragically, they are suffering under the CCP's tightening control. Our story today will focus on Xinjiang. Jeffrey Kane was an investigative journalist in China and the author of the book, The Perfect Police State. He interviewed 168 Uyghurs over 3.5 years. And his book documents many human rights abuse cases. Kane's previous visit to Xinjiang's capital lasted only 3 days. Then he was detained and asked to leave.
Since 2016, the People's Republic of China has engaged in an unprecedented experiment in social control in this region. It has deployed novel technologies in artificial intelligence, facial recognition, voice recognition, and biometric data collection to oppress its people in new and novel ways.
Kane says many of his interviewees mentioned something in common. That is, many Chinese high-tech companies, including Huawei, are working on innovations that are later used to exert psycho-torture on Chinese people.
When refugees and former camp detainees say psychological torture, they mean the feeling of constantly being watched, not by humans, but by crude software algorithms designed to predict future crimes and acts of terrorism with great inaccuracy.
Kane told us his interviewees were so scared that they would be flagged as potential criminals under the CCP's surveillance that they seemed to develop their own system of self-monitoring.
They trained themselves to become like machines or robots, able to answer every question from the police in a pre-programmed way, repressing their own feelings, thoughts, and desires in the process.
Some interviewees who had been detained said their fellow inmates in the Xinjiang concentration camp are suppressed to such an extent that they lack personalities and even expressions. They told Kane it was as if they had had a memory wipe. And Congressman Jim McGovern voiced concerns about forced labor in Xinjiang. He said audits in the region have been unreliable, making scrutiny on this issue dubious, and wondered if the surveillance is adding to the problem. Kane responded with a definitive yes.
There is a serious problem of extreme surveillance simply overpowering whatever audit function can exist within your typical multinational or American corporation that operates in the region of Xinjiang.
The CCP wants total control. A BBC report in May said the CCP is even using AI to detect the state of people's emotions, and they are testing the technology on Uyghurs.
Communist China's surveillance tactics reach new highs amid the pandemic. A wave of the CCP virus has hit the northern Chinese city of Dalian. And now, in addition to repeated virus tests and massive lockdowns, the communist regime has started installing an alarm system on the door of each household so it can watch the quarantined residents. Official figures say Dalian now has 280 confirmed CCP virus cases, with the epicenter in the Zhuanghe area. Since last week, almost all business operations in the area have been suspended, and authorities have put a seal on the door of every household, affecting the entire area's population of 900,000 people. Local resident Mr. Lin told NTD that the control is getting worse.
To protect his identity, we have distorted his voice.
They put alarm systems on every door. They will know as soon as you step out of your home. They will come and get you. They vigorously arrest people. If you casually walk out your door, they will take you away.
Dalian is not the first city to use this method. Earlier this month, authorities in the northwestern city Lanzhou began monitoring people using the system. Local media posted a video praising the system for its effectiveness. The video shows the system detected that someone opened an apartment door in Building D. The worker assigned to monitor them noticed immediately and called the resident. Here's their dialogue.
你好，地座1003啊。那个啥，你刚门铃响着呢，你是出去了吗？放垃圾去了啊。好的，好的，那就赶紧回家啊。好嘞，好，再见，
The authorities seem to be happy with the system. A woman told local media the system greatly facilitates their work. In the U.S., concerns have been growing about the Chinese military getting a hold of new technology through Western universities. And now a top European university is finding itself as a real-life example. The University of Copenhagen found its own professor had been working with a Chinese military general. The two were studying a drug that helps Chinese soldiers to improve their combat ability on high plateaus. Specifically, the drug aims to prevent brain damage. It's a problem facing Chinese soldiers in high-altitude areas like Tibet. Finding a solution to this problem has become a priority for the Chinese military, as it hinders soldiers' ability to fight in Tibet. Tibet is a sensitive area for Beijing. It borders multiple countries where Beijing lays claim to disputed territories. And the Chinese military has increased drills in Tibet after border clashes with India. As for the Chinese professor, his name is Zhang Guojie. He didn't tell the university about his research with the Chinese general. The university only found out about it after the two published a paper on the study. The university doesn't require reporting co-authors on scientific papers. And what's more, they are not the only two co-authors either. Founders from a close partner of the university called BGI Group also contributed. BGI is the world's largest genomics company. It came under fire earlier this year over accusations that it harvested data from millions of pregnant women around the world and shared it with the Chinese military. The University of Copenhagen's ties with BGI run deep. For one, the university hosts one of Europe's oldest genetics institutes and is among BGI's biggest international partners. One of BGI's founders and some staff members are even alumni of the school. BGI also built its European headquarters on the school campus. And finally, the company funds more than 24 researchers at the university, including Zhang. Back in China, BGI has been working with the Chinese military general on other gene-related studies. The incident comes after a warning from Denmark's intelligence agency that Danish universities could be unwittingly involved in foreign military research. Citing examples in a report, the agency says the threat is real and that Denmark is also an attractive target due to its high research standards. Denmark's higher education ministry is launching a review of risks of international research cooperation. More bad news for Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. The company saw its shares drop after releasing its most recent earnings report.
China's biggest online shopping giant, Alibaba, saw its share dip down over 10% on Friday. That's after the company slashed its forecast for annual revenue growth earlier. Alibaba now expects year-on-year revenue to rise no more than 23%. That would mark the smallest gain since its stock market debut in 2014. It's also down from an earlier forecast of closer to 30%. The firm cited headwinds, including increased competition and China's crackdown on its big tech firms. Chief Executive Daniel Zhang said clothing and general merchandise were among the worst-hit departments. Established players like Alibaba now have to contend with new entrants into e-commerce, including short video app Kuaishou. Such firms are benefiting from regulators' desire to see more competition. Alibaba has also had to rethink how it works amid increased scrutiny from watchdogs. Beijing has been tightening its grip on this tech giant, slapping an over $2 billion fine on the company over antitrust charges. Chinese authorities have urged firms to focus on what they call common prosperity, not sales growth. The term common prosperity could mean big companies in China will have to willingly sacrifice their wealth for the regime. For the most recent quarter, Alibaba reported revenue up 29%, its slowest gain in 6 quarters. Including the latest losses, its shares are now down 40% this year.
There are hundreds of millions of migrant workers in China.
And children left behind by them are protesting, but it seems Chinese police won't even let kids demonstrate.
Migrant workers are people whose homes are in the rural areas of China, but they work elsewhere, like in big cities or metropolitan areas. When they leave home, most of them also leave behind their young children. The number of children left behind is in the tens of millions. These children live with their grandparents for most of their early life. They only get to see their parents during one holiday each year, the Chinese Spring Festival. Sometimes these kids get to go to school, and other times there are no schools in their region. An online video shows a group of migrant workers' children demonstrating with a banner. It reads, "We want to go to school. We don't want to be left behind children."
The migrant kids were in front of the petition office in the central Chinese city Xinjiang. Based on the way they're dressed, it doesn't seem to be a recent video, but it's only now making the rounds on social media.
Some of these kids lead a tough life. If their grandparents are too old to care for them, they learn to take care of themselves, with some even taking on adult responsibilities at a young age. China's capital is intensifying the city's pandemic prevention measures. City authorities now have narrow requirements for anyone outside of Beijing wanting to enter. This as the Beijing Olympics approaches, just a couple months away. NTD's Don Ma has more.
As the Beijing Olympics inches closer, health authorities are dramatically stepping up virus control and prevention measures. Earlier this week, the Beijing Municipal Public Security Bureau announced a new pandemic control measure for the capital. Every single person entering the city will be screened for the virus by authorities. Those wishing to enter must hold a negative virus test from within the last 48 hours. On top of that, their personal health code, part of China's contract tracing system, must show as green, meaning they have not come into contact with known virus patients. Those who have been to areas deemed at risk for catching the virus within the last 14 days are not allowed to enter. A spokesman for the Security Bureau says the police will check every car and every person. Beijing locals have told NTD that many districts have not eased their pandemic control measures. Several of these districts hold some 15,000 residents.
Yesterday, there was a person from Zhukou, Henan province who could not enter Beijing. He could not enter even after getting tested for the virus. It doesn't matter if you're from a high-risk or low-risk area. If your city has a single case, you cannot enter Beijing. The main reason is because of the Winter Olympic Games.
Beijing's vice mayor has previously said that for the city, the virus would be one of the biggest challenges for the Winter Games. So far, 3 foreign athletes in Beijing have already tested positive. Despite stepping up control measures, Chinese health officials report no new virus cases found in Beijing on Thursday.
Now, let's take a look at some of the effects of China's virus prevention and control measures. In Inner Mongolia, a video recently posted online shows a clash between Chinese police and a group of people who had just completed their quarantine. They want to leave the hotel, but the police aren't letting them. The people say the quarantine fee is too high. An officer can be seen sitting in front of the exit, preventing them from opening the door. Later in the video, voices can be heard saying that the police are hitting people. Meanwhile, in China's Xinjiang, a farmer found his entire field of produce in ruins after he was quarantined for 14 days. He can be heard saying, "I can't sell this anymore. How am I supposed to live? What am I supposed to do?" And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.